You're welcome. All right, I think you all should have papers now. Oh, he was talking. Who killed Goliath? Pops, you said everybody knows that. Okay. I'd say Mom's is the most accurate. David through God. All right, who knows the memory verse? Well, we know she does. You don't have a book? Oh.
Judy said she started to learn.
All right, Judy.
Tell us what you know so far.
If we say we know something, we discover, we deceive ourselves because we don't have the truth in us. That's about all I
If
want.
we confess our sins.
If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and will cleanse us from all unrighteousness.
Nice. 1 John 1, 8 and 9.
It's hard for an old woman.
You did good. Look at all the young women that didn't speak up.
I get a prize.
You get to read next week, too. That's a prize. So last lesson, we did 1 Samuel 16. What significant event did we learn about in that chapter? Hello, hello. I don't know what's going on. David was anointed to be king. Where did that take place? Bethlehem. What's significant about it? It's where he was from, where Christ comes from. So today we're going to look at who killed Goliath. Starting in 1 Samuel 17. I'll do the first 16 verses. Don't make fun of my voice. I barely got one left. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were gathered at Succoth, which belongs in Judah, in a camp between Succoth and Azekah in Ephes Dammam. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered, and they camped in the valley of Elah and drew up in line of battle against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. And there came out of the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail. And the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had on bronze armor on his legs, and a javelins of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was that of a weaver's beam, and the spearhead weighed 600 shekels of iron. And the shield bearer went before him, and he stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man from yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah named Jesse, who had 8 sons. In the days of Saul, the men who were already old and advanced in years. The 3 oldest of Jesse had followed Saul to battle. And the names of these 3 sons who went to battle were Eliab the firstborn, and next to him Abinadab, and third Shema. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul. But David went back and forth from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistine came forward and took his stand morning and evening. So where were the battle lines drawn? In the valley of Elah. Which armies opposing Israel? Philistines. What are some of the things you could tell us about Goliath? He's big. How big? 9'6". Most of the manuscripts, yes. Yeah, if you look at some of the older manuscripts, it says he is 6 cubits in a span, which would be like 6'9". Most of them say 9'9". It's a text variant. It doesn't really matter. To the Jews, he was huge. Either which way. 6'9" makes me look small. I'm only 6'5". NET, I think it is.
NET Bible puts Goliath close to 7 foot. Don't we use the NEV?
We use ESV.
What's the difference?
Which manuscripts they translate the Bible out of?
I thought E was in the middle for English.
NET is New English Translations. I have one. It's a good translation.
Isn't that what we use?
We use ESV, English Standard Version.
What's the difference?
Not a whole lot. King James, they would have used older manuscripts, so they would have been the 9 foot. Yeah. His height? Let's go back. Yeah, it tells you in cubits and spans. How much does his armor weigh? Does your Bible tell you that? 125 pounds. His armor. Goliath's armor weighed 125 pounds. His spearhead, what's it saying there? 15 pounds? 15 pounds in the spearhead on the end of a tree trunk, 4-inch pole. So I lean to that he was probably 9 foot something, if you're carrying around that kind of weight, that kind of size. If you can hold a 15-pound spearhead at the end of a pole, you're one big dude.
You read something about 5 shekels.
I don't think it was 5, though, was it? Yeah, Goliath is one of the few remaining, because at this point they've wiped out most of those tribes. But there was giants when they came and spied on the land. Whose brother? We don't know. There's a extra biblical that talks about the 5 brothers of Goliath, because David picks up 6 stones or 5 stones. How many? 5 stones. So he has 4 brothers. That's the story, but it doesn't really tell us here.
Was he possibly in the whole?
Okay. You're going to get me in trouble. Yes, he would have been a descendant. If you take the view that Nephilim were fallen angels procreating with human women, making men of great renown, great size, giants. Genesis 6 says there were Nephilim in those days and after. And then when you move fast forward to when they go in and spy the land of Israel, they're terrified of the giants that are still in that land. Now, mind you, these are 5'4" tall men. I would probably constitute a giant. But I think they were quite bigger than that, because when they talk about the bed, it's 10 foot long and, made of solid steel to hold up the king. So yeah, I would say they're still descendants of Nephilim. 6'5" and shrinking. Yeah, because that's a little over 8 feet, so he wouldn't have fit in the room at 9 foot. That's a big dude. That's what I mean. Even 6'9", how tall are you, Claire? 5'2", so that's the average height of the Jewish person, just about over her. Come here. Claire. So even if he was 6'9", I'm going to be a giant, So regardless if he's 6'9" or 9'6", he was huge. But I can tell you, I can carry 125 pounds around fairly easily. And I'm not what you would call muscular. I'm strong, but I'm not muscular. He was a fighting man, so he could do it. But I tend to think he's 9 foot. I go with 9'9". So what was Goliath's challenge? Yeah, we don't have to do this full war. You fight me. Whoever wins the whole battle. So he's pretty confident in his abilities. And obviously, so were all the Philistines, because they let him do it. And obviously, yeah, the Israelites believed him too. How long does he give the challenge? 40 days. It's interesting. There's something about 40. The last time Israelites ran into the giants, what happened? They wandered the deserts for 40 years. Here they get taunted for 40 days. And Jesus was in a desert for 40 days and 40, yep. Rained for 40 days and 40 nights, yep. So last week we learned David was made Saul's armor bearer. So why was David not there with the army? Yep, he was allowed to go back and forth between home to take care of the sheep. So let's look at the rest of the chapter. And Jesse said to David, his son, "Take to your brothers an ephah of parched grain and these 10 loaves and carry them quickly to the camp to your brothers. Also take these 10 cheeses to the commander of their 1,000. See if your brothers are well and bring some token from them." Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. And David rose early in the morning and left the sheep with a keeper and took the provisions and went. And Jesse had commanded him, as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the encampment as the host was going out of the battle line, shouting the war cry. And Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. And David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage and ran through the ranks and went and greeted his brothers. And as he talked with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before. And David heard them. All the men of Israel, when they saw this man, fled from him and were much afraid. And the men of Israel said, "Have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. And David said to the men who stood by him, what shall be done for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him in the same way, so shall it be done to the man who kills him. Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, why have you come down? And with whom have you left those sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumptions and the evil of your heart, that you have come down to see the battle. And David said, what have I done now? Was it not but a word? And he turned away from him toward another, and spoke in the same way. And the people answered him again as before. When the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight this Philistine. And Saul said to David, you are not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth. And he has been a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he rose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. And Saul clothed David in his armor, and he put on a helmet of bronze on his head, and clothed him with a coat of mail. And David strapped his sword over his armor, and tried in vain to go, for he had not tested them. But David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. So David put them off. And he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in his shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. And the Philistine moved forward and came near to David with his shield bearer in front of him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. And the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field. And David said to the Philistine, you come to me with your sword and with your spear and with your javelin, but I have come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into your hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies over to the host of the Philistines this day, to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth. And the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into my hand. When the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, David ran quickly towards the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face on the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. There was no sword in the hand of David. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of its sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and Judah rose up in a shout and pursued them, the Philistines, as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron, so that the wounded Philistines fell on the way from Shekharim as far as Gath and Ekron. And the people of Israel came back from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their camp. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. And as soon as Saul saw David go out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, as the soul lives, O king, I do not know. And the king said, inquire whose son the boy is. And as soon as David returned from striking down the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, whose son are you, young man? And David answered, I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite. He played the music for him. He should have known who he was. I take that as he's losing his mind a little bit. You'll see that more and more as further we go in this chapter. And he's the king. He probably paid very little mind to who was playing the flute or who he liked, just as long as they were doing what they were told. So why was David sent to the battle? Take food. Daddy wanted to report on his other 3 sons. What does he witness when he shows up? Goliath, yep. And God's army cowering in fear. How did Saul try to motivate the Israelites to go against Goliath? I'll give you riches, my daughter's hand in marriage, and your father's house can remain tax-free. Angry with him. It's his older brother. Why is his older brother so angry with him?
What will be done for the man who kills his Philistine? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine who should defy the armies of the Lord? He's asking, it's basically, why doesn't he just stand in the out letting this guy insult?
But why does that make his brother so mad at him? I think
More courage just by asking the question.
than most of them have.
Saying,
Yeah.
just addressing the issue by pointing out that this guy is not, if God, he doesn't have God on his side, we do, and why aren't we doing something about it?
I think also lingers in there, here's the youngest of 8 sons that just got anointed as a king. This is the oldest of 8 sons who should have been. Jealousy. Jealousy plays a lot into everything we do. When David offered to fight Goliath, what was Saul's response? You're too young. You can't do that. Mm-hmm. What credentials does David give to Saul that he can't? I've killed a lion. I've killed a bear. If God can get them into my hands, he can give this Goliath in my hands. Who's David give all the credit for all those acts to? God. Something that the rest of the soldiers seem to have forgot on those battle lines. When Saul offers David his armor, how does he respond? Couldn't wear it. Wasn't tested.
He's also too restricted. He wouldn't be able to swing his arm and
Wasn't made for him, yeah. So when you picture David and Goliath, how do you picture the scene in your head? I think it was one of your questions. Don't we always picture it as this little teenage boy fighting this giant, massive? When Saul was anointed king, what did they say about him? Here comes Saul. He is head and shoulders above everybody else. So if we put everybody at 5'4", he's almost 6 foot. He's 5'10", 5'11". So how big's David if Saul is offering him his armor? He's about 5'10". He's got to be close to the same size or they wouldn't even try to put that armor on him. David's not some little kid anymore. He's 18 to 20 years old. He's a full-grown man. He's almost head and shoulders over the rest of Israel. He's about the size of Saul. So he's a big boy in Israel's sight. Because he didn't say he didn't wear the armor because it was too big for him. He wasn't tested. He couldn't move. He didn't know how he'd throw his sling or stone. He's never wore the armor before in battle. What did David want everyone assembled to know in verse 46 and 7? That there is a God in Israel. Now the text seems to tell us that Goliath got killed twice. Verse 50 says he gets killed, and then verse 52 says he gets killed again. How do you reconcile that? Yeah, he got knocked out. He fell over like he was dead. Everybody's like, he gone. But when David runs over and pulls out Goliath's sword and chops his head off with it, now he's definitely gone. There is no doubt he's dead now. All right, so let's look at your who killed Goliath. That was your answer, God and David? Yep. David kills Goliath, but God is the ultimate victor. Who was leading the armies? Saul. How old was David? 18 to 20. Yeah, it doesn't really tell us in there, but we put him right around there. What was Goliath's challenge? One-on-one combat. Choose for you a man to fight me. Yep, winner takes all. But you notice they didn't even stick to it. Once Goliath's head's cut off, Philistines ran. They didn't go right into slavery, did they? Nope, took off. What weapon did he take into battle? Draw a picture. Sling? What's a sling look like? No. Everybody in our age, we think of a slingshot. It's not that. It's that. It's a cloth with 2 pieces of rope typed onto it that you can. It was called a sling. We think slingshot. It's not. It's a sling. You can do much more damage with a sling than you can with a slingshot. What is the most important message of this? Well, I guess we skipped 8, huh? Who is the hero of this section? God. What is the most important message of this passage? When you hear it preached, what do you always hear preached? It's always courage or valor. It's not the message. Yeah. Yeah. Trusting in God. Yeah. That's the main message of this whole thing. Not courage, not valor. It's faith or trust in God. David could have gone after him with nothing in his hands and wouldn't have been afraid because he trusted that God would be the victor. What other details do you recall from this passage? This is personal, so. I always remember the 5 stones. Why pick up 5 stones if you trust in God? You only need 1. No, not if you trust in God. You can't miss. But as the stories go, Goliath had 4 brothers. So he picked up a couple extra in case they got rowdy. But, I don't know, he just picked up 5 stones. The other thing that always sticks out to me is the weight and size of his armor and his instruments. Like David picks up that sword. That had to be a heavy, big sword. It's Goliath's sword. If he's 9 foot tall, here's, picture somebody 5'10" picking up a 5 foot long sword. And lobbing that guy's head off. But it's those things that stick in my head. I believe so, yeah. Because he keeps all his armor in the tent, it tells us in this section. He takes all of the armor of Goliath. He had to be a pretty, yeah. Yep. Yeah. All right. Ed, you want to close us in prayer?